Welcome back to the table, friends. I am your humble host, Gray DMs, and with me, as always, is Owen.
Hi there.
So today we are going to continue our exploration of Werewolf the Apocalypse, not just 5th edition. We are going to go into some of the lore and to some of the history of Werewolf the Apocalypse and kind of see if maybe 5th edition's update to the lore has been maybe a little hasty.
Okay.
Or does it kind of match? So
I feel like there's thousands of voices screaming, yes!
1,000 voices cried out all at once, then were silenced. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the history of one of the tribes, the Black Furies. And then at the end of it, hopefully, Owen, I'm going to kind of see your opinion on, do you think the change was worth it? Do you I want to get your thoughts on it.
Sure.
So
I'm impressed that White Wolf saw the, scope and made furries in Werewolf.
Furies.
Oh,
Black Furies.
Oh, okay. I guess that makes more sense.
Let's not go down that other path. Okay, so unfortunately, not unfortunately, because that would be horrific. Unlike vampire, there is no prime werewolf, okay? So, there's no antediluvians running around. But, werewolves generally, the Garou generally conceive that they're from Gaia. So, we talk about their early history. We're going to go back into the age of kind of myth, legend, like we talked before.
Sure.
And then we'll go to stuff with more substance. So, we'll kind of walk through this, and then we can kind of take breaks to explore stuff if you have questions, which I may or may not be able to answer.
Okay.
So, the Black Furies. The legend passed down from early times says that the Black Furies were originally created by the moon goddess Luna in the incarnation of the Greek goddess Artemis and appointed as the protectors of the wild and avengers of the worst crimes against Gaia. The first pack of Black Furies, the Medusae, or Gorgons, embodied the 5 auspices and saw themselves as unconscious hand of Gaia. They settled the territories around the Aegean Sea. In time, the first pack became ancestors and then a collective totem for their descendants. So they often said that the first pack was kind of like the unconscious hand of Gaia, like their drive to root out or their drive to tear into something or to hunt was kind of like Gaia scratching, the itch on its body. So they were very kind of spiritual, so much so that they became like totem spirits themselves. So the Black Furies claim that they were the force behind the Imperium. Yeah. We'll take that one.
Okay.
So the Black Furies claimed that they were the force behind the Imperium once they discovered that man had learned how sex and childbirth correlated and reacted to this knowledge by subjugating women and children as property.
Crazy how that works.
Yeah. Many Furies protested against the Concord and formed the Bacchantes to continue their work of avenging crimes against women and children. So basically, if you remember in our werewolf discussion before, there's a period of time where the Garou basically decided that humans had to be driven back to the city gates.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of also, I don't think we touched on it in that episode, but essentially that's where the delirium was basically put into all of our subconscious because we knew that there was something out there that was meant to hunt us.
Yeah.
So much of their oral tradition is intertwined with Greek myths. The Furies believed that the Titans were the offspring of Gaia and a personification of the Weaver, and that their reign was an age of harmony and prosperity. The reign of the 12 Olympians was seen as a fall from this golden age, corrupted by imbalance and patriarchy, but the intercession of the tribal totem Artemis, who walked among the Olympians, convinced the Black Furies to coexist with them. The Furies are the Erinnes, the infernal goddess of vengeance and hounders of those who violate women, children, and the wilderness. In their stories, it was the Black Furies that hunted Orestes after he had slain his mother and seized the administration of justice in Athens after Orestes had been pardoned by Athena, figured the Furies regarded as representation of the patriarchy. Athena, who sought to subjugate Pegasus, the new spiritual person patron of the Black Furies after the last of the Medusa had died and Artemis had no longer the necessary resources to continue to act as a tribal totem. Athena's pawn, Bellerophon, had strife with the Red Talons. This inspired the story of the clash between the Greek heroes and the Chimera. When Pegasus became old enough to rebel against him, Bellerophon gelded it, which outraged Pegasus and led it to throw him off his back over the Aegean Sea. Afterwards, Pegasus landed in a fury cairn and proclaimed that it would never again kneel before a male, but also spoke the edict to allow male metis of cubs, Furies, to be accepted into the tribe, though it would take centuries until the Furies actually consistently practice this. The Black Furies also take credit for the destruction of Sodom described in the Bible in retribution for the gang rape of Lot's daughters. The Black Furies were among those tribes, together with the Fianna and the Fenrir, that worked to end the Roman Empire. The Furies saw Rome as a tool of the patriarchy and were happy to see it gone. So to go back to this is kind of interesting, the menace of cubs, the Furies, basically the whole thing is when a Garou has a child with a wolf, they usually call that a lupus Garou, meaning that they basically were raised as a wolf.
Okay.
So they spend their first part of their life as a wolf. That's how they understand the world. Then they become a proper Garou. So then they get the ability, presumably, to think, to, like the higher functions.
So is that a wereman?
It is a lupus werewolf or lupus Garou. I know this is like a weird,
but it's a wolf that can turn into a man.
Yes, as where a werewolf that we would think of is a Hamid Garou,
right? Which
is born a man. But there is a third set, and this is why Garou are forbidden to have children with other Garou, because if they give birth to a metis, the metis is basically born as the Krynos form. So instead of like a wolf born as a Garou or a man born as a Garou,
it's a werewolf born.
So like the problem is that they have to spend a portion of their life learning the world filled with rage.
Right.
They're basically almost always exclusively sterile, kind of like a mule.
Right.
And so most Garou kind of see them as like essentially like not a keyword abomination, but bad, gotta kill it.
Right.
But because of this kind of like historical or this mythological connection to Pegasus, who had its breeding capability taken away, there's this kind of edict in the Furies that like they're allowed to live. Conversely, if a Fury has a Hamid, basically Garou child that is a male, they'll kill it.
Ooh.
Yeah, like they basically kill any of their Garou offspring that are males. Like they're pretty hardcore about this. So like the only male figures that they allow to raise are basically ones who can't breed.
Right.
So, okay, Dark Ages. Through much of the early Dark Ages, the Black Furies fought against Christianity and its persecution of wise women and faiths that were closer to their ideal of their goddess than their own. The rise of the Order of Our Merciful Mother, which sought to subtly nudge Christianity closer to venerating Gaia, disguised as Mary, Mother of God, or at least respecting women in nature, sparked bloody strife within the tribe until several elders managed to mediate between the order and other camps. During the Crusades, the Furies moved to end what they saw as the systematic oppression of women. The tribe isolated itself from the other Garou tribes in this time, fearful of contracting the flaying plague. The practices of the persecution of priests brought by the Black Furies kinfolk the scrutiny of the Inquisition. The misogynistic worldview of the witch hunters did much to set the Furies against them. While the Furies themselves did not suffer during the burning times to the same extent of more vulnerable supernaturals like vampires, damage was done to their kinfolk nonetheless. That brings us up to the Victorian Age. Multiple Furies fled from Europe when the Americas were discovered, hoping to find places untainted by man to keep safe. Instead, they met the Pure tribes. The Furies saw the multiple sacred sites, due to the low threat of the worm, were defended by merely one or two packs and seized them for themselves. In contrast to other tribes, The Furies were often content to use diplomacy to gain the approval of the pure tribes to safeguard their Karns. Their non-aggressive style of negotiation ensured that the Black Furies were among those tribes within the Garou Nation with amiable relations to the pure. Other Furies tried to establish Karns in the Amazon rainforest, but were met with heavy resistance from the local Fera that no amount of diplomacy could overcome. Were-felines.
Okay.
And, werewolves and were-felines just don't get along.
So, like, I understand where werewolves fit and the grand plan of Gaia. I understand where the were-bears kind of fit. Where do were-felines fit?
That's a good... They keep the mice out. The were-mice.
I feel like they're more like, hey, everything here looks really nice and organized. I'm just going to knock it over.
They're the ultimate form of the Wild's retake. That's a really nice house you got there. It'd be a shame if...
Somebody just tapped it a few times.
It's over. So good. That was so good.
They would be a bigger plague, but they just sleep most of the time.
Just lazy. As the tribe was divided to two large territories, arguments between both factions began. The American Furies demanded more packs to hold the new Karns and defend them against the ever-growing threat of Banes and other threats like the Storm Eater, while the European Furies were unable to spare any warriors since the power of the Worm and the Weaver grew to disastrous heights in Europe following the Industrial Revolution and military conflicts. Wow, so this actually glossed over a whole bunch of stuff we could talk about. But this is our first really talk about the pure tribes.
Yeah.
So basically in the old lore, after kind of Gaia founded, the Garou Nation, these tribes are essentially originally Luna was the patron of all tribes. And then eventually spirits started, every tribe has their own mythology of how they broke off. But 3 tribes took off and they disappeared for 3,000 years.
A long time.
And the whole thing is they came to America. And this is also where we get in one of the problematic parts that was so-called fixed in the 5th edition.
Mm-hmm. I can guess.
Yeah. So when the largely European-based other tribes came to America, they found these pure tribes. And so you can kind of get an idea that it kind of makes sense. In the real world, the Native Americans, the indigenous peoples of America, basically were in this unique situation that was much the opposite of Europe, where they had vast quantity of resources and land, so they were not forced to develop technology by conflict. And so they basically kind of playing Civilization, they put all their points into culture.
Yeah. Though to clarify, a lot of Indian tribes, Native American tribes, had conflict with each other. Oh,
they absolutely had conflict with each other, but when you're talking about the scale and scope over
they
time...
They were spread out a lot more.
Yeah, and you just didn't have the compressed force of constant contact where they had to iterate on technology to basically make sure their survival.
Right.
And because of that, like I said, this isn't so this is where the game or the older history could possibly be accused of being fetishistic of this kind of stuff. Because of that, you basically had this force of when European settlers came over to America and they met basically the Native Americans there. The Native Americans had this depth of their culture that honestly was years down the progression trait, of basically, like I said, if you gamify it, they put all their points into culture.
Right.
And the European settlers put all their points in industry and basically, disease blankets won.
Yeah.
And they got crushed. Right. It's a very sad thing. So they kind of try to play that out in the Garou Nation terms where they have the European tribes come over and you have this kind of concept that if the Garou are protectors of the wild and you have this vast open wilderness of basically North America and these 3 tribal groups are protecting it, doesn't mean they didn't get into scraps and fights and didn't mean they could have wars and stuff, but they didn't have the pressures needed to go through that kind of intense conflict and building. So what they end up finding was that where they would expect multiple tribes to be defending a single Karn, they found one.
Yeah.
And so they kind of approached it with this concept of like, well, hey, you guys aren't doing your due diligence here and you're protecting your stuff. They're like, well, protect it from what? Like the worm and the wild. Yeah, exactly. Like we bring the weaver, over, and like now that the weaver and the weaver and the worm are like, their forces are like coming over. And they actually called the Garou that came over, like basically servants of the worm. They're like, you're bringing it here, which this is what led, but like the Black Furies were one of the groups that like, especially during an encounter with their forming of their first Karn or their taking of their first Karn, they tried to like negotiate. And they got in this kind of like intense standoff where every night the basically multiple packs would come and talk to them and be like, you got to leave. And then they would go out there and like present their case, and then they would go away. And the next day they would come back and be like, all right, cool, you guys got to leave. They kept doing this until eventually they got into a big fight against one of the agents of the worm.
Yeah.
And then they were like, maybe we can work something out here, but like, But anyway, all that stuff presented to, like we said, a sensitivity evaluator.
Yeah.
Like, get it out of the book. So I think that's where a lot of that stuff just got aced.
Yeah.
Anyway, so modern knights. The growing movement of the emancipation again split the tribe. Some Furies believe that women are still not liberated from the patriarchal yoke, while others contend that women have been liberated to the extent that the modern women prefer to act like men rather than actual women. Other points of contention are the issues of abortion, which some Furies condemn as the worst. Okay, let's just not talk about that. Why? Ever straightening these schisms are the influx of young Garou who see the Black Furies as merely excuses to swagger like the males of other tribes, or an excuse to stomp on and abuse men instead of preservers of mothers' mysteries. The European Furies have recently entered an alliance with Yuri Konizetso of the Shadow Lords to police the Balkans for worm taint. Multiple Furies were also involved in the battle against Baba Yaga and her servants in Russia.
They make a cream now for that worm taint.
So this is kind of cool. Is like in the lead up to the Gehenna time period, the whole Baba Yaga thing happened, which we talked about before, where Baba Yaga basically woke up. And the thing she did is she basically took these spirits, incarnate maybe, and she essentially like corrupted them. And like these things were like multiple packs had to take each one down.
Yeah. And
then she put up a shadow curtain over like Russia. And the shadow curtain was nothing was allowed to scry or gain information from like, across the shadow curtain, which was basically Baba Yaga's hunting the Bruja down.
Yeah.
But it also kind of gets into this whole thing about like that weird dynamic between werewolves and vampires where like one ancient vampire was taking down tribes,
right?
Versus, basically, obviously, like 4 vampires running into one werewolf, like losing their crap. The other thing that was really cool about reading about the older books, because I was reading the tribe book for the Black Furies, was the writer's sense of playing off their interpretation of other events. So they said one of the modern topics and one of the things that's basically upset the clan the most in the modern Knights, because this was all written up in the lead up to 2000s, was like the great tsunami that hit Bangladesh, where basically this is when the antediluvian woke up.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so their whole thing is they're like some old vampire or some vampire like spirit showed up and like a bunch of us died. You're like,
You know what happened?
And then they go out there and like the leftovers are irradiated. So they're like, did it nuke it? Like, this whole thing is kind of cool. Like, like that whole, their concept of what that is isn't, I thought that was interesting. Okay, so the Central America and Southern North America, i.e. south of Oklahoma, Furies are experiencing a curious wild plague. The metamorphic plague is responsible for a growing number of male non-metis in Furies at large. The disease is far more likely to affect the infected psyche. The plague alters a fundamental principle within the person dramatically, i.e. turns a 180-degree arc on it. Personalities, memories, and even gender can change. Also, around the time of the appearance of the metamorphic plague, Medusa, one of the 5 Gorgons, disappeared.
Uh-oh.
Medusa was the longest living and the most powerful of the Gorgons. The other 4 Gorgons have separated and become 4 distinct totems. What this means for the tribe at large remains to be seen. So the original pack was kind of a totem in and of themselves, and they spoke with one voice. And all of a sudden, one of them was gone, and a bunch of the sub-packs that were like conversing with them were like only hearing one of their voices.
Mm-hmm.
And so this ends up kind of splitting off, and everybody's trying to figure out what's going on.
Sure, makes sense.
And yeah, a bunch of the Furies who are very clearly, do not keep men around.
Yeah.
Get turned into men.
We'd like to revise some of our rules and laws.
Okay, guys, hear me out. I think we can learn a lot from the men. Did you get the wild plague? Whether or not I did, I just think we should have this discussion. Okay, so let's do this. Organization. The Black Furies are ruled by the Inner Calyx and Outer Calyx, composed of the oldest and most renowned Furies of the tribe. The Outer Calyx is comprised of 13 members who dictate Fury orthodoxy and set tribal customs. Officially, the Outer Calyx are chosen randomly by lot every year, but some Furies point out that Metis are never chosen, and one incumbent has remained in the Calyx for several consecutive years. The Inner Calyx is much more secretive and comprised of 5 members, each mirroring one of the original Medusae as an epitome of their respective auspices. No one knows how many members of the Inner Calyx are chosen. However, some claim that Luna herself has a hand in it. Their identities are absolutely secret. So camps are referred to as kukloi, Greek for circles, among the Black Furies. So there are some camps that you might be a part of. The Amazons of Diana. The Amazons of Diana are a group of furries that are more connected with being brash, furious. I know.
This is a group of furries.
Dude, the Amazon of Diana are a group of furry.
What are they? What are they, Gray?
Furies that are more concerned with being brash, unstoppable warrior women than sacred avengers. This camp is rarely seen as a formal group and is more catch-all for those more dedicated to rightly proving themselves the equal of any man in combat against the worm. Some within this camp see it as necessary to bring the Furies into the 21st century and away from their pointless and archaic practice of pursuing criminals. But Garou, who simply hate all males, tend to gravitate to the Amazons as well. Some Furies outside the camp consider Amazons to be immature, overly violent, and misandrous. Avenging Mother. The Avenging Mother is a very small subsect that works to bring down the patriarchy structures of the Garou Nation and tribes like the Silver Fangs by exploiting their trust. Bacantes. In contrast with the Amazons, the Bacantes are a conservative faction that pursue the Furies' original sacred purpose, avenging wrongs against women and children with fanatical zeal and merciless violence. They believe that in doing so, they fight the worm's hold over humanity and avenge Gaia herself. The Freebooters.
Orcs?
Right. The Freebooters' mission is to find new wild places that can be consecrated to Gaia and opened as cairns. The Kuklos is shrinking because there are so few wild places left in the world. A fraction of freebooters believe they need to find a new body for Gaia elsewhere in the Umbra, somewhere the worm is not found. Moondaughters. Moondaughters seek to spread Gaia's worship through New Age neo-paganism, and they push themselves to keep Gaia's spirit alive through change, embodying the force of the wild as best they can. Their ritual methods change as quickly as New Age fashions change. Order of the Merciful Mother. The Order of our Merciful Mother is among the most derided Kuklos within the tribe, acting subtly to bring others' dogma closer to a version that respects Gaia and women. The Order works to reform human society and Christianity by utilizing their own tools against them. They take credit for the rising popularity of the Virgin Mary. Yeah, that was kind of interesting because they did like a big take on how like in the recent century, the church has come out and said more about like basically the sanctity of Mary, and that's a big kind of point. And they're like, "Oh, that wasn't us," but it's cool.
It's the Bene Gesserit.
The sisterhood began as a network to protect kinfolk, women, and Garou from the Inquisition and get them to safety. Today they manage the various kinfolk networks of the tribe, offering succor to them and informing other tribe members when a kinfolk has been wronged by a man's hands. They are also adept at gathering resources for the tribe to use. Temple of Artemis. The Temple of Artemis is among the oldest kukloi and one of the most conservative. They counsel withdraw from the Garou Nation and rededicating the Furies to their original purpose as the Avengers of Women. They also act as judges to Furies who have broken tribal customs. Let's talk about their tribal culture. While many outsiders claim to be the ultimate feminist and men-hating Amazons, the Black Furies think of themselves as providing opportunities to females who would have otherwise been oppressed. Instead of working through intimidation, the Furies are usually content to help women and children through persuasion and compromise. To those who offend them or hurt their charges, however, the Furies are merciless avengers and punishers of whoever they consider crimes. The personal views of each Fury greatly vary from member to member. However, honor, their connection to the wild, and opposition to the Weaver tend to be constants for all members. While the Black Furies present the face of women-only club, they count a surprising number of male metis among their ranks. In spite of legends that say Black Furies only give birth to females, male cubs are born to Furies just as often as female cubs. They're ceremoniously sacrificed, all the male cubs in the distant past. Now, however, most are given to other tribes, while the rest are secretly sacrificed. Most often, male Humid and Lupus cubs are given to the children of Gaia. Furies can either be born into the tribe or recruited from other tribes, particularly ones that show little respect to women, such as the Get of Fenris. In part, the exchange of their newborn male cubs allows them to take away female cubs that are in dangerous circumstances.
Oh.
Political culture. The Black Furies divide their roles and spiritual positions within the tribe according to their age. Young Furies are considered maidens as long as they have not birthed a child. The Black Furies believe that breeding is a sacred duty and gift and carefully choose the fathers of their children. After that event, they are regarded as mothers. When a mother becomes too old to bear children, they are often referred to as crones. Metis do not count to any of these roles. The Black Furies have added several additional tenets to the litany: suffer no abuse of women, keep the wild places pure, train the weak, protect the helpless, and remember your parents. The last is a reminder that fatherhood and fathers are just as important as mothers and motherhood, and that Gaia demands equality between the sexes, not a matriarchy.
Okay, seems a little hypocritical, but...
Although all Furies tend to operate with similar methods, there are lines of division in how much men are to be shunned. All Furies, no matter their view, will avenge a crime against a female. Older Furies tend to regard men more lowly than others in their tribe, viewing them as little more than oppressors and troublemakers. Despite this, they are among those Furies that are the first to point out that a man is half of the equation and should not be pushed away or denied. Younger Furies tend to have more liberal views regarding Garou in general, and men in particular, and many are willing to work with males for the benefit of everyone. But there are several who have taken up rather misandric views and begin to lose themselves to their own rage. These divisions are even present in the Gorgons, ranging from the man-hating Medusa and Istheme to the egalitarian Helene. Religious culture. As female, the Black Furies view themselves as having a closer connection with Earth Mother Gaia than any males. In exchange for their gifts, private mutes are held regularly as recognition of these gifts, and also to acknowledge the tribe as a whole. Some rites are open to kinfolk and humans, but others, particularly the physically and emotionally exhausting Ulaka Magellis, are exclusively for Black Furies. Some mutes also exclude male Metis Furies. While the main focus of veneration of the Black Furies is directed towards Gaia and Luna, always in three aspects, maiden, mother, and crone, they recognize the power of the triptych, their name for the triad, to them. The triad are the more... I looked up how to say this.
But you didn't remember.
The Morae. To them, the triad are the Morae, with the wild personified as Clotho, who spins the thread, the Weaver, who the Furies refer to as Namer, personifies as Lachesis, who measures the thread, and the worm as a trophus who cuts the thread. The chief enemy of the tribe is considered an entity known as the patriarch. Some Furies equate the patriarch with the worm, others with the weaver, and some even with the Abrahamic God. They consider it not an embodiment of fatherhood or manhood in general, but an incarnation of sexism and the abuse and oppression of women. In contrast, the Furies revere the wild as a force of femininity, of instinct instead of the intellectual abstractions of the weaver. The wild is the force that keeps the cycles of Gaia and Luna moving and complements them. So yeah, that was a lot to parse.
Yeah, it was. There's a lot going on there.
So in some White Wolf, generally basically would present material from the perspective of who they're talking of.
Mm-hmm.
So like when you start reading Clan or Tribe book Black Fury, basically it's like written from the perspective of the Black Fury.
Right.
And they go on this kind of lengthy talk about how like the Weaver is the one who took concepts and weaved them into words to lock them down and have power over them.
Mm-hmm.
So they stole free thinking from us.
Gotcha.
So there's this kind of whole bent of like how they view, generally they kind of view the worm as male. They kind of feel that like that the negative side of masculinity is like entropy. It's like tearing down. It is that force. And so they view themselves like as this is like the primal battle, while the wild is basically like the best sides of femininity, like birth, creation, chaos. My question is like the Weaver, like in between.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that they aren't hypocritical and not to say like their viewpoint is like correct, but like you can kind of get how they're making these abstractions and like how they kind of carry this viewpoint of the world. So like they have this kind of strong concept that basically if everything was if everything was equal when like Gaia kind of gave birth to the world, masculinity and femininity would kind of went in this equal place. But that essentially when men went from, oh my gosh, this person who basically I had this encounter with miraculously created a child,
right.
and that transitioned into, oh, I was a part of it, and this is a commodity, and
I need to take advantage of this.
Yeah, and like specific weird parts where they're talking about like a father is the first thing that comes between a child and their mother because they're the first force that wedges a separation.
Right.
And I was like, oh, it's very evocative. Like you can definitely see how this kind of thinking.
Right, but that's only if you look at it as it's not a partnership with the child.
Oh yeah, no, they're wrong.
Yeah,
wrong. This is a slant on everything that's very pro-feminine, and they kind of say like the traditional Furies, the ones who are actually probably closer to their theory, are more like no, we're a force to protect and make sure that pendulum doesn't swing over and beat down women and children, not to elevate them above everybody, but like,
which is the actual goal of feminism.
Exactly.
Feminism isn't it's empowerment of women, yes, but it's an empowerment of everyone for equality. And that's, a lot of people don't realize that.
Yes. When the aims of proper feminist theory is equality.
Yes.
And an end result where basically respect and equality are the norm. Doesn't mean it always happens that way.
No.
Much as the Furies sometime go after like their whole thing during basically the Dark Ages and then even the Victorian Age, their whole thing was they essentially would often wage a war against essentially the church, and their target were the priests. And like, yeah, I'm not defending them, but like,
they have good reason to not like the priests.
Yeah, but at the same time, like you can feel it's that you're talking about this complex issue and they boiled into this ferocity to defend it in one direction. So that was essentially the kind of congealed conglomeration of like first edition all the way up to revised version of the Furies. So the question then is, what are they now?
I'm assuming they're probably not called the Black Furies anymore.
They are.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Here we go.
Surprised with that.
In Werewolf 5th edition, the Black Furies, now followers of Gorgon, accept men and assigned male at birth members as equals. Rather than concerning themselves predominantly with the social injustices of misogyny and sexism, the Furies bestow paramount importance on justice for the socially disadvantaged of all stripes and place no cause above or beneath any other. The tribe is renowned for circumventing or shattering obstacles, whether a litter barrier in the form of enemy formations or a glass ceiling that prevents fair outcomes. They stated their sobriquet continues to identify them as Furies with good cause. Even among the Garou, the Black Furies have a reputation for escalating in situations where a compromise would, in their opinion, yield only half measures. At their best, the Black Furies want to set the balance right. Provoke them too greatly, however, and the Black Furies pursue justice at all costs. To the Black Furies' perspective, nothing is so despicable as those who are in a position of advantage and use it to harm the less fortunate. It's a point of view that resonates greatly with Garou's service to Gaia, and thus are the Black Furies renowned as being amongst the most righteous, or self-righteous, of all werewolves. Their enthusiasm puts Black Furies at the forefront of meaningful conflicts, whether the high visibility, well-attended causes dear to the public, or the well-hidden, greenwashed backroom deals where some unaware and unlucky soul is left holding the bag. Police brutality and wage inequities, public utility scams, and yet another landful of consumer garbage. These events and others earn the ire of the Black Furies looking to set things right. At the same time, righteousness can be turned to hatred, and a Black Fury may have enemies for the sake of having enemies, even where none truly exist. A perilous risk when mixing Garou politics and Cairn meetings.
I understand why they changed it. I don't think it's better.
It's tough.
So while I don't agree with their policy in the older versions, as far as a compelling group of people, I think it's far more interesting. Where the current version just sounds like somebody that you'd read a post by on Tumblr.
It very much feels like the older version was you going to an Italian restaurant and getting a particular pasta dish that like is highly specific and people would argue about how it should be prepared. And the newer vision is like, hey, I got some spaghetti.
Yeah. Like all we serve is spaghetti.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, spaghetti's still good.
Yeah.
It still does have the flavor that you probably went after, but there are people who will probably die on the hill saying that the two never...
Well, and then it also turns into that whole thing. It was never go to Italy and order spaghetti. They will murder you. Spaghetti isn't a thing over there.
It's pasta.
Yeah. And like I kind of see it as the same thing, where it's just, I don't know. Yeah, it is, I get it. I get their purpose. I get the targets they're going after in the current version. I understand what they're doing because they're trying to make it appeal more to what is actually going on now. The types of things that people are going against now, the types of things that people rail against now, which makes sense. There is a lot of inequity in the world, and it's not just, men and women, like it's everything, jobs, housing, everything. And like you said in there, like greenwashing stuff where, hey, our company does all these things to save the environment, but at the same time, when you're not looking, like we're just loading the ocean with garbage and plastic and, like it's that whole thing. And I get it. It's just not as interesting to me.
No, I think that's kind of the point at like, they made a very safe decision that cost them
exactly
flavor.
Exactly. They made a safe decision, which is all the people that complain about Disney and Star Wars and everything like that. They're doing the same thing. They're making the safe bet. And unfortunately, if you want to make something that's entertaining, you have to take a chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you will never, ever make something that everyone likes. It is impossible. So stop trying.
Yeah. And it kind of sucks because there's parts of this that basically I would probably have never been able to engage with.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I could have made a female Garou that was like part of the Black Furies, but there are parts that were really interesting. Like their whole concept of like not selling, but trading off their children.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting too, because it's like at some point you've taken so many women from another tribe that they might be running out of women.
Yeah. And also like the concept of what if you're one of those men?
Yeah.
Who like, your mother's a Black Fury, but you have this kind of scorn that she's always
She gave you up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the whole concept of their metis too, like basically effectively like the cat, they're not really castrated, but like the infertile castrated men that they keep around, like that's a whole thing. And then there was this, in the lead up to Gehenna, there was basically this legend of what would be the pure metis, which is if two metis managed to have a child, they would give birth to basically one that was like whole. They didn't have the deformities and the inherent and they did. And his name was Martin.
we gotta give him a powerful name, something that really stirs people. Martin.
And then there's this whole thing about like this metis. Yeah, right. There's this whole thing, separate thing about this metis that stood up starting to like basically call himself Spartacus. And he started gathering all the male Furies together.
Yeah.
And like basically they were like trying to they didn't know whether they were trying to break off and do their own thing or just trying to like get equal representation.
Change the system.
Yeah. And basically they ended up challenging some pretty potent Garou Black Fury, and she got whipped pretty freaking bad. Yeah. The other thing I didn't know was, I don't think it's in here. The Black Furies often wielded Labrys, which is basically a Greek two-headed axe. Like anytime you've ever seen like a minotaur in like Greek, that classic two-headed.
Yep.
And that symbol is also used to champion lesbian, is used in lesbian iconography as like this kind of. So like that was weird. I just never, I had to look up what that was, and then it turned out that was like this.
It's the first use of something like scissoring.
The axe bites both ways, apparently.
Yeah.
So like
I got it.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Like there was a lot of interesting stuff in them, but like you said, it's the end result is that essentially all this stuff is been traded away for what they probably deem as a safe bet.
Sanitized.
And I think if you were creating this game today without 20 years or whatever, 30 years of history behind it, then it makes sense to make them what they are today.
Right. And
start building from there. It just probably won't feel good to anybody with the loss of that much flavor.
Yeah.
So you got some trivia before we go. Oh, we can go over some things here that are interesting. So obviously the Black Furies are based around the Greek Cynophalia, dog-headed men that were living close by or with the Amazons, according to the Pliny the Elder, the Alexander Romance attributed to Pseudo-Callisthenes and Adam of Brenma.
Okay.
Yeah. In addition,
cultured swine.
Sorry. In addition, their tribe names come from the Renes, known as the Furies, Greek deities of vengeance that often went after men and whoever swore a false oath. The Renes are also associated with night and darkness, thus where the black in the name comes from. So we both recently watched that Netflix series with Jeff Goldblum.
Oh.
What was that?
What was it called? It wasn't Olympus. Chaos.
Yes. Yeah, and the Furies were in that.
Yeah,
they were pretty cool. They served.
Actually, those Furies were actually pretty badass. And even the gods were afraid of them.
Yeah, and that's kind of the whole thing. Like, I believe, according to what the book said, the first introduction of the Furies into Greek mythology deals with the Battle of Troy. So essentially, the king that wants to go to basically Troy, he has his oracles consult the gods, and the gods say like, oh, well, like the sea and the wind is not going to give you passage right away. But he was so impatient, he sacrificed his daughter. So he goes and he fights in Troy and he comes back. And when he comes back, his like wife's just like, you sacrificed your daughter for better winds, and kills him. So then his son kills his mother in revenge for his father, and the Furies come over, and basically the Athenian justice system said that since a man's life is worth more than a woman's, the son was in the right to gain retribution for the death of his father.
Wow.
And then the Furies hunted the man into the ocean. And so, like, that's in their thing where they're talking about, like, the difference between the myth of that and the fact that, no, a pack of Furies came in and hunted that guy.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool. So according to the Silver Record, the Black Fury tribal glyph is comprised of the glyphs for lightning and judgment, and that the glyph is supposed to represent a judgment scale seen in courts of law. This is another thing. If you look at the old glyph is kind of more glyph rune-like, and the new one's more like, well, angry scratches, you know. Also influential was the influx of female werewolf fiction in the 70s and 80s, such as Susie McKee's Carnus Boobs, 1989. I don't want to look that up.
Look it up.
Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories, 1979, adapted into The Company of Wolves in 1984. Leela the Werewolf by Peter S. Beagle, 1974.
Name.
And later nonfiction like Dr. Clarice Piccola Estes' Women Who Run with Wolves, 1992. So no full explanation has been made yet from the switch from Pegasus to Gorgon in the 5th edition. As 5th edition splits off entirely from the revised timeline in a different direction than basically the 20th edition, the 20th anniversary, a possible explanation for the switch might have been to combat the metamorphic plague caused by the Wild, first described in Tribook Black Furies, and Pegasus might have been viewed as a fallen to the Wild. It is unknown if the metamorphic plague could come back or not in 5th edition, but would be used by 5th edition storytellers as a consequence for allying too closely to the Wild for other Garou. The plague is caused from being exposed to too much wild energy, that it eventually manifests itself as the Garou's soul. The change happens subtly, but can alter one's personalities, memories, or physical features over time until the Garou adopts a completely new identity. It kind of makes sense. It's basically that kind of Fae part of the Wild. Like, if it's a source of ever-growing change and, like, you surround yourself in it, why aren't you fundamentally changed?
Right.
So, thought that was pretty interesting, too. But yeah, the Black Furies, man. Number one of the tribes, the first one out. And yeah.
That's really interesting.
It's crazy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here. If you want to go and read back, I enjoyed quite thoroughly the tribe book, Black Fury, revised. I think basically there's a lot of stuff that we're probably not talking about. They talk about, like I said, coming to America. They talk about a lot of the opinions on, like, kind of framing their understanding of how, like, these events occurred. A lot of interesting stuff about, like, their viewpoint on vampires and their viewpoint on mages and stuff like that. But yeah, like, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a whole tribe of them.
Yeah, whole freaking tribe of them. So better watch out, and I don't know, tell your mother you love her.
It's a little late for that, but
yeah, the Furies are at the door.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I think I'm good.
You wrapped up the soju up. Well,
yeah.
We'll talk to you guys later then.
Goodbye.